Today on our videos, we're going to talk about the differences between a play-by-play and color commentator on a broadcast. So what's the true difference between a play-by-play commentator and a color commentator? A lot of folks, well, they get a different feeling about it. Some people think that you'd let a play-by-play guy and a color commentator guy just talk at will and talk at random. But that could be a little confusing at times as to who's actually calling the action. When in all actuality, depending upon what sport you're talking about, whether it's football, baseball, basketball, soccer, it doesn't really matter. You want the play-by-play guy to actually describe what's going on the play. Actually, the play as it happens. And then when the play ends, and you have a break in the action, let's take football for instance. In color commentating, that's where he steps in and describes what he just saw. If he's a guy who used to play the game, it's really easy for a color commentator to describe an open angle or perhaps what he saw defensively. Or maybe the guy was a lineman, so he could really describe what's going on the line. Or maybe you have a kicker like I do, and he actually played receiver when he was in high school, so he knows a little ins and outs of all different fields of the positions on the field. So you want a color commentator to talk about the play between the plays. But when the play is actually going on, you want the color commentator responsible for telling the people that are watching or listening exactly what's going on the play. A little harder in basketball because there's not as much downtime. So a lot of times you'll have to use some nonverbal communication, whether that's a tap on the wrist of your color commentator letting him know, hey, you can go ahead and talk now, but let him know before the games ever start. You need to kind of wrap things up before we get to the other end of the floor. And a lot of that has to do with the amount of time you spend with your color commentator. Now, if you get thrown into the mix of a guy you've never met before, it's good to go ahead before you start a broadcast and let him know the kind of the ground rules of what's going on and the guidelines or maybe even just the basics and say, hey, here's where I'm going to kind of let you in on the broadcast. And a lot of times when you're in basketball, you want the color commentator to be the lead when you're on a TV broadcast of any kind, whether it's the internet only or if it's over the actual TV airwaves. If it's on radio, the color commentator is kind of more of a backseat driver because you got to hear the action and know what's going on the radio side. So there's a give and a take between radio and TV when it comes to play-by-play and color commentary. The main thing is you don't want the two to get confused and somebody watching be like, well, who's calling the action? I'm not really sure. You always want to establish who that play-by-play guy is as opposed to the color commentator. All right, let's go over a few of your different sports, the main sports, football, basketball, and baseball. We'll start with football. Now in football, a lot of times you have downtime between plays. Not a lot of times, every time, because you've got a play clock, you've got the tackle made, and then you've got the opportunity for your color commentator to come in right behind the play-by-play guy and describe what he just saw. In football on television, it's a little bit different than it is when you're on radio. On radio, you need that guy, play-by-play guy, to fill in every single minute of the play, exactly what's going on, what formation he sees to start the play, defensively and offensively. Is he in a shotgun, in the pistol formation, an I formation, whatever he sees out there, he describes leading up to the line of scrimmage what's going on to the snap of the ball. He describes the play as it happens, and when the play is finished and he feels like he's out, he'll allow the color commentator to jump in and describe what he saw. Whether it was a great opening of a hole by the offensive line, or perhaps it was a great defensive play. Whatever it happens to be for that color commentator, that's his role to jump in and kind of describe what he saw. Because a lot of times that's what we're doing as fans when we watch on TV anyway. We're screaming at the TV, right? Well, that's exactly what the color commentator is kind of doing. He's the fan of the game. Oftentimes, he's played the game. So he's going to give you really good insight on what happened. Oftentimes, the play-by-play guy hasn't played the game to a certain point, maybe high school, maybe college at the most. But a lot of times those play-by-play guys, or like me, the guys that wish they could have played the game, but they love the sport anyway. So in football, it's a little bit of an easier transition when it comes to the difference of roles between play-by-play and color commentating. All right, let's talk about basketball. Basketball is a little bit of a different animal just because of the high-paced nature of basketball. There isn't a lot of downtime, so that's when it really becomes critical and important for the play-by-play and color commentator to be on the same page prior to a broadcast, whether that's a quick 5-minute meeting or if you're lucky like me and you've worked with a guy for a number of years, you already kind of know each other's tendencies, when to hop in, when to hop out. In basketball, you've got a quick dunk or you've got a quick three, and before you know it, the ball's on the other end of the floor and you're scoring again. So where does the color commentator fit in when it comes to basketball? Again, it comes to just being comfortable with your other side of things. And when you're on a TV broadcast, that is a lot more allowance for a color commentator to be able to talk over a play because the fan can still see the action. When it's on radio, it's a little more tricky because you want to hear the other action and everybody wants to hear their kids' names called. So when you're talking about basketball on the radio side, it's often different than it is on the TV side. But when it comes to that basketball high-paced nature, you've got to know where your ins and outs are for your color commentator and for your play-by-play guy. All right, let's talk about baseball. Well, in baseball, you've got a lot of downtime, and that's where it's really important to have a color commentator that played the sport. It's almost necessary just because they can give you so much more information, and there are so many down moments between pitches, between at-bats, between innings, between injuries, wherever it might be, pitching changes. You've got so many opportunities for a color commentator to share his knowledge about playing the sport, and oftentimes that's where you get a lot of the good nuggets where you may not even know that he pitched in high school as well, even though he became a great hitter, or vice versa. He was a great hitter but became a great pitcher. That's where you get those stories, and that's where baseball really is, telling a story. It's where I actually got my start, was calling baseball. And you have to fill a lot of airtime when you're on the radio side. Well, the best part is when you're on the TV side of things, you can allow the picture to breathe. And oftentimes you'll even hear a radio broadcaster and they'll allow a lot of dead air out there just because you hear the natural noise of the game, whether it's the vendors or the fans chatting or whatever it might be. Don't ever feel like you have to feel every moment of a broadcast when it comes to baseball, because you're going to find that there is a lot of downtime in baseball to fill. Now, you may have some sponsor obligations you need to take care of, and that's fine, but you need to let the broadcast breathe every once in a while when it comes to baseball. So that's the difference between a play-by-play commentator and a color commentator on a broadcast. If you like the video, be sure you hit the like button and make sure you subscribe for more videos just like this one.